Welcome to Serious Social. I'm joined by Millie Youngman, and we're going to take a trip through social media and travel. With a background in digital marketing and content, Millie manages the strategy and activations for 4 social media brands for Travelopia UK Adventure Division, including Exodus Travel and Trek America. Over the past 3 years, she's created cross-platform strategies for organic and paid social and built social media channels from scratch for a new brand. She's also a travel writer and blogger, and I'll put her blog in our comments so that you can see that, with experience working on both sides of the influencer marketing industry. We've seen a lot of unpredictable behaviours on social, but especially in travel over the last few months, led by confusion over government advice, concerns over travel companies in trouble, and polarising debate between getting away and travel shaming. It's the most definitely turbulent of times for travel. Yet, for many travel businesses, it's also been a chance to build a brand and establish reputation and get much closer to consumers. You may have seen the recent webinar with Suzanne Kaur from Princess Cruises, where we talked about managing the now, next and normal on social, weathering the storm together. Her and her marketing team have stayed true to their values, been authentic and honest, and got closer than ever to crew and guests alike. It can be done, and it can be done very well. So having Millie with us opens up a very different discussion. Her experience across multiple brands with differing propositions and audiences offers both deeper insight and some meta trends and thinking that will help us all shape our social over the coming months. So welcome, Millie. So have you been staying at home or going to the office or a bit of both?
Hi, thanks for having me. So I've been working from home. Our offices are closed, so everyone in the team is spread out, most of us around London, different places. I've been working from a nice little desk set up next to my bookshelf, which is my kind of cozy corner, just setting up a space where I quite like working, really, which is nice. Yeah.
Very nice. Yes, I work in chaos, but today I'm in the office. Hey. The travel industry has been really hit very hard during the pandemic with so much change. Is there a limited opportunity for social, or is it time to really do something different?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious that at the beginning of this pandemic and its impact on the Western side of the world particularly, a lot of the things that I was dealing with would be crisis comms. So having those tour suspensions. So the brands I work across are all tour operators. And because of all the country closures, we had to suspend a lot of our tours. So it was really about kind of communicating with our customers those changes and making them feel safe and reassured. It was kind of a situation where everyone across the company pitched in. So we had members of the marketing team kind of answering the phones for customer service. So it was all hands on deck, really. And then kind of during those middle months, so after that initial rush where we used social for communication channels, we weren't doing any paid social activities. So it was primarily just organic content. And that meant I really had to kind of focus on creating that organic reach through engaging content. We did actually see an engagement rate increase of 2% during those 3 months, which I was really happy about, especially because we weren't getting that reach that we get through paid social. So the reach is down, but in terms of engagement, we were really up. And I think that was just through the fact that I really focused on creating content that was encouraging customers to share those memories of travel. Sharing their photos from trips was a major one. We got a lot of people who've been on trips with us and are photographers or just like to take a snap on their phone. And everybody loves sharing their own things on social, I think, which did really well.
And a bit of dreaming.
Yeah, definitely. I think our kind of big focus was, okay, we can't tell people to go to a destination because they can't go to the destination, but let's talk about the amazing experience you've had. Let's talk about what travel means to you. And I think so many people, especially during lockdown when they couldn't leave the house, couldn't sort of do the things they'd normally do, that organic content was a really good way for them to engage with the things that they're interested in. Yes. So yeah, that was really a key thing that I looked at doing over the kind of middle months.
Terrific. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I asked it's interesting what you said at the beginning as well, which is that everybody went hands-on, everybody, and that's actually can be a really positive thing, can't it? Because people
Yeah.
who don't naturally spend time talking to customers are talking to customers suddenly. But I asked the team what questions they'd like to ask you, because it's lovely to have some fresh thinking. And my colleague Lawrence would love to know where the biggest pain point of the last few months has been. Is it dealing with your own kind of company expectations and crisis comms, or is it actually being people generally don't think about being in the travel industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been probably quite a lot of pain points, as there have for everyone in pretty much every industry. I think one major one for us that I can think of is, I think you briefly mentioned it before, but like the changing government guidance around travel. So since the travel corridors began to come into place, we were originally looking at doing something with air bridges because we thought that was going to be the name, but then we had to change that to travel corridors. And as we know, the turnaround on a lot of these kind of government decisions has been quite haphazard at times. We never really know what's going on until 10 o'clock on a Thursday evening when we'd all be normally having a drink. But now we're jumping onto social media to change campaigns. So yeah, I think that's been a big pain point for us, especially in terms of like planning in advance, marketing campaigns. So we've really had to, I'm saying kind of we, in the sense the entire marketing team have been part of this, just pivoting and like turning around content really quickly. So for example, as soon as Portugal originally left the quarantine list, we quickly turned around a really strong Portugal campaign that got us loads of bookings. Obviously now Portugal's back on the list, but we got a lot of bookings for next year, which is a really good sign for next year. So it's really been about, I guess, being reactive and quick thinking when these decisions, and I also kind of describe it as being prepared to be reactive. So kind of knowing that something's coming and being ready for that. So for me, it's been about kind of having those social campaigns prepared. So now we're using a bit more paid social again. I've been running retargeting campaigns to site visitors, people who've shown interest in different places, and being able to have those campaigns ready to switch on and switch off based on the country has been really helpful. So I don't.
That's smart. Yeah. That's smart. So you're getting and that is when people talk about agile marketing, having, you know, I think in social we're agile anyway, because the world is always shifting, regardless if it isn't the platforms changing things. It's people's behaviours changing, and then, as you rightly say, I think the big challenge is that you really are truly pivoting when the government changes things. And I love the fact that you're getting yourself organised in order to turn things off and on, and it's sort of I feel like you're orchestrating. You're like the orchestra conductor sitting behind all this activity, just pushing the right buttons to get the right activity.
I think my Facebook ads manager has never looked as kind of organised as it does now. It's amazing.
I'm quite jealous.
I was going to say, kind of mention another thing as well that kind of relates to that is, as the Exodus brand, we actually work globally, which has kind of thrown another step into the issues with what countries are open, what countries are quarantining. So we've got audiences in North America and the APAC regions too. So one thing that's been really important to us is actually, for me, working with the marketing teams in those areas, actually making sure that we're kind of maximizing our campaigns. So creating a campaign around the booking promise we're offering, that needs to then go to North America and APAC teams to be kind of adjusted for those markets. So I think if you're working in a global brand right now, making sure that you're aware of what's going on in those different territories that you work in is super important as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because it's, for many of the brands that we talk to, they are managing their social on a global basis, and when that's challenging in itself, but when we're in a process where every country is doing a different thing, that can also, is keeping on top of all that news 24/7 is, yes, I'm surprised you're still awake. So in all of that, is there any time to try new things? It's really interesting. In some industries, people are really innovating and testing and learning. And it would be great if you could share anything or stuff that you're finding because you're in this intense period you're learning. It'd be really interesting to hear that.
I mean, I think there was a definite kind of period where I sort of finally had the time to actually sit down and do probably what I'd call getting my house in order a bit. So sort of all those things that for the past couple of even years we've wanted to do. So things to do with like creating more growth reports and really kind of organizing all the stats that we have in place. I've actually found some time to do, which has been quite refreshing. And looking back at past campaigns, kind of pulling all that information together and then getting some data that can really inform our future campaigns moving forward. It's probably not the most exciting and new and innovative thing, but I think having the chance to sit down and look at that without the distractions of having to do a million other things has been really helpful to me.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we talk a lot about optimization, and particularly in social, we also talk a lot about data, but we also find when campaigns or uplifts or activities come to an end, nobody wants to take them apart. We take them apart because we're desperate to know what's worked and what hasn't worked. But it's really interesting because that is truly how you do your ongoing optimization through the year, because not everything is about driving traffic for a sale today. And you mentioned something earlier, which is retargeting. That by being smart and seeing an uplift in traffic to your website, even if people aren't booking, then retargeting them for bookings is, it seems like the bleeding obvious, but you wouldn't know that if you're not looking at the data.
I mean, I think for me, one thing that I've done quite a lot of over the past year is actually really looking at that customer journey and the different stages people will go to. So I'll start with a prospecting audience and show them some really kind of destination content, inspirational content, following up with something a little bit more in depth once they've kind of come through, either engaged with that content or come through to our site from that. And then once they've kind of seen that more informational content, it's then following up again with the kind of slightly more sales push. So sharing some tours that they'd be interested in from their activities on, say, that video and a blog post. And I found that was really helpful in our peak travel campaign, our peak booking campaign, which was January and February this year. A time when, yeah, things were maybe a bit easier. But that strategy, kind of, I've looked back at how that's worked during the past couple of months. And that strategy worked really well for us in terms of finding new audiences and actually getting them further along that funnel and the customer journey. So yeah.
Yes, and it's the, I always think it's the most wonderful thing about social, having worked, you know, back in the day in TV, and I've worked everywhere. But the reality is that social can push all the way through the funnel, but it really plays in awareness and consideration. And then you can drive it out through your search, through your website, through your CRM, all of these elements, as well as obviously social. But I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, the thing is, it's the closest you can get to a customer because you are sitting in the palm of their hand most of the time. It's such an intimate experience that you can really develop good experiences. It's why people get so outraged when social isn't right for them, when it's the wrong content or it feels wrong. Let's talk about your audience a little bit more, because you don't just have one audience. You are a glutton for punishment. Let's talk firstly. So whilst almost 25% of people in the UK say they prefer a holiday in the UK, almost the same percentage say they want to travel abroad for a holiday again as soon as they can. How are you adapting your content plans to meet what are very two different kinds of demands from your customer?
Yeah, I think that's definitely sort of been a challenge and probably represented in comments that we've got on some content. I've very much, particularly with kind of our organic social and also our kind of prospecting based paid social, it's been very much about being like quite gentle and sensitive to kind of the differences in customer needs. So again, it's sort of focusing on that dreaming concept. It's not saying you have to travel to this place and you have to travel now. So recently we had an offer on some tours, and making sure that I included that the offer was on departures until July next year was quite an important thing, because otherwise you just sort of get that response as like, oh, why would I want to go now? There's a pandemic. But actually saying you don't have to travel now. But if you're thinking about travel in the future, here's how we can help you. I think has been a sort of key part of my social messaging and the brand's kind of marketing outlook overall. And I think, yeah, I think talking about, we're kind of really focusing on how travel sort of brings people together, and also how the meaningful impact that travel has on the world. So talking about like sustainable travel is a great way to engage people with our brand without sort of saying go travel straight away. And we've been doing quite a lot of content around our sustainable projects. It fits really well with also how our communities that we operate in are recovering in the COVID crisis, because it is a global crisis that has affected everyone that we work with, we travel with. There's nobody who's been exempt from this. So yeah.
And that's quite interesting, is it? Because we talked a little bit how the government changing everything and just everything changing everything, but how do you keep on top of consumer behaviors? I mean, we've not just faced the pandemic, we've faced activation. You touched there on the need for ethical brands, sustainable brands. We're in a cancel culture. It feels like that on a big scale you can very clearly see the behavioral change, but how are you keeping on top of travel audiences, and are there any nuggets, are there any insight which you found which you think is worth sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was really helpful for us is a couple of months ago, when the world sort of began to reopen again, we actually ran a customer survey about our customers' expectations and their concerns for travel after lockdown. And really unsurprisingly, a big focus was around safety, around cleanliness, and booking flexibility. So off the back of that, I actually ran a social campaign using this data to form the creative. So for example, imagery that showcased that such and such percentage of our customers are concerned about this, and then using the captions or a secondary Instagram story slide to actually answer those concerns using our Book and Travel with Confidence charter. So I think it was a really good way to kind of firstly find out what our audiences are thinking, and then look at how we can like alter our comms to really push those key elements. And also it was a really good way to represent visually what our audience are thinking and their concerns, and somebody can see that, say 74% of people are worried about this, and they'll think, oh, I relate to that, and then they'll engage with the content. So I think using data in that way was a really big success for us.
Yeah, I can so see that. And it leads into my next question, to be honest with you, which is there a need right now for more personalised and niche content that is, or should we be going out with the big brand messages, the big, we're a trusted brand? What's your balance?
I think my balance is a bit of both, just to be that kind of sitting on the fence type. I think both have worked for us in different ways, like different segments of our audiences. So for kind of the sections of the audience that are familiar with us, it's been sort of about reigniting and inspiring them to think about their future travel. So again, using that sort of dreaming of travel element, that's been really prominent across our feeds. And also we've been using in paid social, so pinpointing the customers interested in specific niches. So people who are interested in walking and cycling. I mean, it's something we kind of already did, but that's, I think, even more important now, is really personalizing our message so that small budget that probably everyone's working with now gets the best ROI.
And that's, yeah, I mean, last year we identified it. I know you helped me shape the report for travel, which is, you know, just because holidays are just not a blanket purchase, we have become more and more specialized looking at the holidays we want, and in fact we drilled into active holidays and adventure holidays because they are a growing market, I suspect they will come back with further once we're able to get out and about a little bit more. And that kind of brings us nicely onto content. And CJ, our managing director, says he's very curious about what insights you can offer into the content and channel strategy you deploy across the brands that you work with. And does your content, do you have to really work hard at making your content really different from, across each different channel? Because, or do you tend to put out the same stuff?
I mean, it's very, very different across the brands that I've worked across for the past 4 years now. So I think it's really important kind of identifying who your audience are. It's like a really basic kind of part of, I think, any kind of marketing, but I think sometimes people forget that and think more about the message that they want to push rather than who their audience are, what their audience wants to hear. Like, I can't remember where I picked it up from, but I listened to a talk once and somebody did a little diagram, and then there's the two kind of circles. Is it a Venn diagram with the circles?
Yeah.
And you've got one that says what your customer wants to hear, and then you've got one that's what you want to say as a brand. And then that little bit where they meet in the middle is the sweet spot you need to aim for. And you can't have that without having a clearly defined knowledge of your audience, but then also a kind of clearly defined brand message. So having both of those elements and looking at how they fit together for your individual brand is really important. And then there's also the element of thinking about what platforms that audience will be using. So for example, for Exodus, the majority of our target customers tend to use Facebook more than any other platform. But Instagram also engages the kind of younger end of that audience. And we sort of speak on Instagram in a different way than we would on Facebook. And then in terms of Trek America, which is kind of an 18 to 38 youth brand, those audiences really engage on Instagram stories, much more so than with the Exodus Instagram, despite a similar following. So identifying that and then focusing on using the in-platform tools like quizzes and question boxes really drove amazing engagement for the Trek America brand. So yeah, identifying your audience, finding out where they are and who they are, really simple, but absolutely vital to anyone starting a social strategy.
For those who may be listening to this on a podcast, I am grinning so broadly. I promise you, I have not teased Millie up at all for this, but this is what we say again and again. You are not creating social for the platforms, and you're not creating social for yourself. If it doesn't resonate and if it isn't relevant and you're not following your audiences, I mean, it's just music to my ears. So how do you deal with, given that, because that is a volume of content, isn't it? So how do you deal with managing all that different? Do you have a kind of a process that you work through?
I have a really big spreadsheet. Anyone who's worked with me, anyone in the marketing team, or used to have an amazing intern, any of them will tell you about my spreadsheet, which is basically all of my content plans across all the platforms. I've got a tab for each brand. Yeah, I have to be super organized. And for some things I plan quite a bit in advance, but then I always leave space for sort of more ad hoc content, like reacting to things that are happening that week, things that are trending. So yeah.
Do you know what? I used to train at the IDM years ago, and in my training session I used to say, let me just be really honest with you, social is about spreadsheets. One way or another, Excel will feature in your workloads. A recent study found that 86% of people said they'd become interested in a specific location after seeing user-generated content. Not surprising, really, is it? Now, you and your customers are not out and about so much. UGC and in the moment sort of content must be a bit of a challenge. How have you adapted? Or have you adapted?
Sorry, I think a mouse just ran across my room. That's great. Sorry, I just got really distracted by that.
Not many people have their kids and their dogs. You just have rodents.
I think it might have actually been a shadow, so I think I'm fine. But anyway, to answer your question, in terms of UGC, which is something that we use quite a lot historically, and I think I talked about it. We did a panel last year, and I talked quite a bit about the importance of UGC and how it really just like drives customer interest. Yeah, it has been a big challenge kind of finding that content during particularly the past, say, 6 months, during the lockdown period when no tours were running. One of the things that we did for Exodus was actually looking to our tour leaders in country to create that inspiring and engaging content. And that spawned our Tour Leaders at Home campaign, which was focused around our leaders sharing like what they're up to during lockdown, fun content from their country. To give an example, our Tour Leader of the Year, Vanya, she sent us some really amazing Italian recipes with some pictures, which we turned into a blog post, and she created a cooking tutorial video, which we posted on our social channels. And our guide and photographer, Paul Goldstein, shared his photography tips during lockdown, and they got some really good engagement too. And it's the kind of content that really resonates with our audience. Like, I think for people who've been on our trips, our tour leaders are so well loved by the customers and such a big part of what we do. It's also been really helpful to reassure some people who are quite rightly concerned about what the kind of people employed in tourism industries are doing, whether they're safe, whether they're okay. And that's quite reassuring for them to see that we're supporting and working with those leaders. And also just really kind of bringing out the elements of our leaders which are knowledgeable, really personable and engaging and fun to be around. And I think that was a really good way to showcase what we do as a brand, by using the people who actually make the brand what it is.
Yeah, what absolutely inside out. And as you rightly say, there is, your tour leaders are as important in the process of people buying a holiday with you as the holiday destination itself. And what a great opportunity to showcase them. It's just fantastic. I think it's a great idea. As you know, Millie, I've always been a bit noisy about people having a little caution in working with influencers. It bothers me a little bit that, true influence is not what we look at, but people who just have large followings, and that influencer campaigns are often not measured very well. Recent research from Stacker, though, suggests that 38% of people say that influencer content never impacts which hotel or resort they choose to stay at when traveling, and only 12% reference a celebrity. I'd love to know what your experience is, and what your views are.
Okay, yeah, this is definitely something I could probably talk quite a lot about. I've actually been on Twitter earlier today having kind of a bit of a conversation around this too. So yeah, it's sort of front of mind at the moment. I do think influencer marketing can be really successful, which we've seen through our Trek America brand, having a lot of people calling up and say, oh, I saw this YouTube video by such and such, or I saw this Instagram story by so-and-so, and I'm really interested in knowing more. I think the main things with influencer marketing, and one of them is that you really need to identify your goals and how you can achieve those at like various stages of the customer journey. So if you're selling, for example, low cost impulse buy purchases, so if you're a cosmetics brand selling a lipstick, something like an Instagram story with a swipe up is a really good way to kind of get that quick win sales, kind of build the brand awareness as well with things like new product launches. I think and it's also very good for kind of inspiring original kind of interest in a destination. But I think when it comes to a product like our tours, which are usually a much longer journey to purchase, you're talking 6 months to even years for some people between finding out about a destination or a company and actually making that purchase. They spend a lot of time like researching the destination or the company. And in that situation, I think where Instagram has kind of been the go-to for influencer marketing, I think there's still a lot of places for things like blogs and YouTube videos, which have that longevity in terms of sticking around. They've got search value. So I think when you're thinking about your influencer campaign, it's really important to think about that funnel and that customer journey and exactly what you want to achieve. Some campaigns will do so well with a kind of big blast of like lots of influencers sharing a product in one go at the same time, whereas some campaign aims may benefit better from the initial kind of destination push, and then following up with SEO posts, videos that are easily found. So yeah, it's really thinking about your goals and how you can achieve them. And I think the second thing is, I probably talked about this a lot before, is really making sure that the influencers that you are targeting will give you the proven ROI based on whatever your goals are. So there may be somebody with an amazing follower number, but their actual reach for those posts may be similar to somebody with a much lower follower number but a really engaged audience. So one thing I always make sure to do if I'm running an influencer campaign is ask for a real proven kind of return on investment. So I asked for examples of previous campaign results. This could be as much as, oh, show me some messages where people have sent something to you saying, oh, I've booked this because of you, I've bought this because of you. And looking at sentiment in their comments and their engagement, like, are people saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to buy this because of you? It's kind of a lot beyond looking at kind of basic stats and numbers. And I think analysing sentiment is actually really important when you're looking at influencers too.
Spot on. And because ultimately it's like all your content, quality, quality, quality. You just can't get away with putting out stuff half-assed, for want of a better word. And we see it again and again, that influencer campaigns that work are where the relationships are built, where the questions are asked, which is what you're doing, and the goals are set exactly as you say. Where they're not, and somehow fairy dust could be sprinkled by an influencer, it tends to fail. Not always, but tends to. So I think I'm with you on that. And I think my challenge with influencer relations has always been do it properly. Otherwise, actually, it's a kind of a form of spam. And I won't say any more because I could go on.
I could add one more thing on influencers if you like.
Yeah.
I think one thing as well is looking at what influencers are like already using like your product or using your brand. So I've worked with influencers who, for example, already booked a Track America trip, but I'm aware that they're kind of talking about that brand. So sort of speaking to them about, okay, you've booked the trip, in return for some either content on your channel or a takeover on our Instagram stories, for example, we can offer you something on the trip. And that tends to work really well. So there's sometimes thinking about sort of looking outside the box, especially if you're a travel brand where offering press trips could be quite expensive, like looking at what influencers are already using your product or part of your brand and how you can work with them. I think that's really important too.
Yes, and I think there is a kind of subsection of influencers which are advocates, and knowing how to spot them. And I think you Millie live and breathe your brand through social. You see that happening when somebody is advocating the brand. It's much harder to do when your social is much more automated, or you're distant as an organization from what's going on. Let's talk about advertising. So according to GWI, which is Global Web Index, 82% of vacationers approve of brands showing ads that explain how they're responding to the pandemic, even now. How do you keep on brands while communicating messages about safety, which you've just done, as you told us, and travel changes in social? Do you find your voice has to change? That's the bit I'm really interested in. Do you have to adapt your brand in order to be more either instructive or to deliver clarity, or can you still be as inspirational as you normally are?
I think for Exodus, I think our kind of tone of voice has always been knowledgeable and engaging. So the fact that we can kind of lean on that fact that our tone of voice is like to be a trusted brand, to be a voice in the industry for adventure travel, to kind of be a market leader, has actually worked really well in our favour in terms of communicating our safety messages, because it's somewhere we've kind of always placed ourselves. And I think there are ways to make messages that are kind of more functional, still fun, but fun and functional. That was a really, really bad pun. Please cut that one out. But yeah, I think when it comes to brands who maybe are considering how to put across those useful messages in the tone of voice, I think creative is a really good way to do it. So like with our data-driven survey communications, using that kind of visual to represent some of the numbers and the stats was a really good way to kind of make it more engaging. And so you're using like visuals, video content, anything like that, which you're maybe using as a brand already. You can kind of keep that look and feel and of how your brand is, but still weave in those kind of messages of reassurance.
And you shared those stats, didn't you? Even though they potentially at first glance might look quite negative.
Yeah, I can't remember where I've put them now.
But I just think that's just really smart, because you did something, you called it out. You said, we know you're worried about traveling, or we know that you're worried about getting on a plane, or blah, 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 but here's how we solve it. It was just a very clever, sharp, as you rightly say, knowledgeable way of hitting people where that pain point is and making it better. Just really, really clever. I'm really impressed that you managed to keep everything, kind of why I asked you the question, but keep everything on brand. I have to ask this, mostly because I am obsessed with TikTok. I mean, every webinar and podcast I'm on, I'm talking about TikTok. And I know I shouldn't be, but I just find it so funny, but there you are. So have you started trialing TikTok?
As a brand, no, but I have so many things I can infuse about with TikTok personally. I absolutely love it. I mean, grandparents on TikTok is my thing. Like, I just love it. There's one of a guy like bouncing down the stairs to Sweet Caroline, and it just absolutely cracks me up. There's just like so much. Like, I mean, there's so much rubbish on TikTok, to be quite frank. Like, some of it is just, why am I watching this? But then there's some stuff on there that's genuinely really like innovative. It's funny, and sometimes just some really basic stuff that's like really relatable that you just look at and go, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like it's a perfect accompaniment to watching telly, because we've sort of run out of Netflix now that we want to watch. So it's kind of, we're watching,
it's done.
So we started watching repeats of things we've already seen and TikToking alongside them. But
I feel like I've done that. I've watched Hamilton on Disney Plus a horrendous amount of times during lockdown. I recommend that.
So actually, one of the areas we haven't touched on, but it's worth just, mentioning, is dark social, such as WhatsApp, because many of us who arrange to go away will, or even with most high ticket items, will start to have conversations with friends and family around the purchase. And that often is a conversation that drifts from very public social profiles and feeds into, WhatsApp and Messenger and potentially Slack and all sorts of private groups, which we can't see. And it feels like that private group, that darker group, that smaller community has really accelerated through the pandemic. Have you thought much about how your content travels between the public and the private?
It's something I really, to be honest, want to look a lot more into. I mean, because I know for me personally, probably a lot of my communication, I don't tend to use. I mean, I use Instagram, but in terms of like conversation and most things, I will now have conversations on WhatsApp, on Messenger. And I think there are things like, so really basic, you can get Messenger advertising on Facebook Ads Manager. And my other tip is to use all your placements when you're doing Facebook Ads Manager and get the right creative for them, because that's something that I've seen to work really well, is letting Facebook do the automatic placements for you. That's just like me going on a little tangent there.
That's right.
But yeah, in terms of actually looking into how it can work for our brand, for our Exodus Edits brand, which is we launched in November for kind of like 30s to 40s, like adventurous short trips that fit with busy lifestyles. We've kind of been talking about how we can use kind of WhatsApp, for example, to create groups around that brand. It's something that's kind of been pushed forward because obviously not being able to run new trips this year, but it's something we are kind of looking at and seeing how we can get into those spaces without being a brand barging into those spaces, which I think is quite dangerous. So it can happen. It's happened with pretty much all social platforms. As soon as they get popular and more and more people are using them, sort of brands come in. I think a lot of brands come in without that like understanding of how the platform works. And one of my favorite sayings that I've heard this year is being not just on the platform, but of the platform. So when you come in to using a platform, you really have to understand the audience there, like the way they interact. So in terms of kind of more like dark social platforms, people are there because they want to be private. They don't want to be bombarded by brand messaging. So looking at it from that perspective, it's about subtlety and not just throwing a brand into people's faces, I think will be a key thing that I'll think about moving forward.
Yeah, I'm with you 110% on this one. I think it's a fine line and a lot of thought needs to go in, and some gentle trialing to see where you personally as a brand fit in that conversation. So I'm with you. You have been utterly amazing, Millie. I have to say, you've given us so much insight. Are you getting away yourself this year? And if so, where?
I haven't got anything planned abroad-wise, which is very weird for me because usually I'm just trying to go to as many places as possible. I'm trying to do the UK a bit more. I went to Whitstable on Sunday, proper like seaside town, fish and chips on the beach, cider, plenty of cider. So yeah, and it was just really nice to kind of get away from London for the day, get away from my house office for the day. It's not been too weird over the summer, I think, because normally I'm such an off-season traveller anyway. I like to travel when there are no children and it's not expensive. So yeah, hopefully I can try and get something in maybe abroad for November time. Be nice. Yeah, we'll see.
I know. I have yet to take my holiday, but I am going in 2 weeks and I am desperate.
Where are you going?
Cornwall. But that's been booked since the beginning of the year, so it was just 2 weeks. Fabulous place, so I'm looking forward to that. So thank you, Millie. You have actually given us a huge amount of insight. Really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us on Serious Social. We'll be back next week with yet another interview with one of my colleagues. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple more weeks. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.